All right, let's jump back into our history of Rome. Let's quickly recap where we've gotten to so far. So we were covering the 7 kings of Rome. So far, we've covered the first 4. So let's just quickly remind ourselves of the major things that happened under their kingship. So starting with Romulus, our first king of Rome, what did he do for Rome?
Started it.
He built the city. He established the initial government. What's one more major thing that he did?
The wall.
The wall, the initial wall that he dug around, yeah. But the other major thing that he did was he combined the Sabines with the Romans and doubled them that way. So he got Rome off to a great start, kicked off, did a lot of warring with the surrounding area, pretty much establishing Rome as the dominant guy, at least in their immediate surroundings. Then we moved on to Numa. We remember anything about Numa?
Made sure Zeus didn't strike religious guy.
He's a religious guy. He kept Zeus's lightning away, or Jupiter it would be.
Oh.
Zeus is Greek, Jupiter Roman. I probably said Zeus, but should have said Jupiter. So Numa, he was a religious guy. No wars under his watch, just focused on elevating the Roman civilization and the view everyone else had of the Romans, establishing a bunch of their religion. Then we went to Tullus Hostilius. What did he do?
He was the fighting guy who went and took on
Back
all
to
guys.
expansionists, right. Trying to grow Rome's influence through conquest. Doing a bunch of conquering again. And then we got Ancus Marcius. The last guy we talked about, what did he do?
He did the calendar, right?
No, the calendar happened under Numa. That was a religious thing.
Oh.
Calendars very much tied with religion for a long time going forward.
I can't remember.
So he was kind of a balance. He's often referred to as a balance between Numa and Tullus, or a balance between Numa and Romulus. He was both kind of an expansionist and kind of a religious guy. He recodified the religion. Remember, this guy kind of did away with a lot of what Numa introduced. So he's reintroducing a lot of what Numa did. He's the one that brought religion to military as well, made the way that the Romans declare war extremely formal. There was a whole ritual that they had to go through. He's also seen as establishing the backbone of Rome's economy. Reminds you what Rome looked like right at the end of his reign. It looked like this. So he was responsible for establishing that coastal city of Ostia and building forts all along the Tiber, building a bridge, a permanent bridge across the Tiber. And so with him, Rome has strong control over the Tiber River. And so this is where we left off with Ancus Marcius. Right? So now we're going to jump in with our first Etruscan king. Before that, let's zoom out for a second and talk about the Etruscans. So zooming way out, here's Rome down here. All our maps have been focusing largely on this area. Fidene would have been like a city right there. That highlighted portion that we just saw before would be roughly like this area right here that Rome has good influence over. So small compared to the 12 Etruscan cities. So while the Romans and the Latins navigated into Italy, the Etruscans are native to Italy. As far as we can tell, they've pretty much been there for as far back as you can go. So they're more native to Italy, and they are definitely the powerful ones on the block still. Rome coming up is still a nobody compared to the Etruscans. And we're going forward, see a lot of conflict between the Etruscans and the Romans. And the strange thing about this is that while the Etruscans are much more powerful than the Romans, we're going to see that the Romans end up winning this conflict in the long run. If I were to take you back 500 BC and have you look at Rome and its influence and look at the Etruscans, and I told you in a couple hundred years, someone's going to be the most powerful guys in Italy, you would have guessed the Etruscans. And yet it's going to be the Romans who come out on top. And why does that end up happening? A big reason that ends up happening is the Etruscans, it's this coalition of 12 powerful cities all shown here. And the problem that the Etruscans have is all those cities are powerful cities. How is that a problem? It's such a balance of power that no one's able to really consolidate power. And the Etruscans are never really strongly united. What we're going to watch with our story of Rome going forward as they expand is they're going to bring all the Latins under Roman control. And everyone's going to answer to this one city. And so it's that consolidation of power that ultimately is going to lead to Rome getting this conflict. But early on, the Etruscans, they're the big boys on the block. Historically speaking, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that Rome was heavily controlled by the Etruscans. we're about to cover a period where the three kings that rule in Rome are Etruscans. And we're going to see that this is a time where Rome adopts a bunch of Etruscan behaviors, a bunch of Etruscan culture. So it's thought that historically that Rome, some speculate it could have even been an Etruscan colony initially. And then there's a lot of speculation by historians that Rome could have actually come under Etruscan control, as in the Etruscans actually controlled it. Now that's not going to be the version of the story that we're following, but it is a version of the story out there. Alright, so any questions about the Etruscans and their position relative to Rome before we continue our story? Go ahead.
Just to clarify, there's just the 12 important cities of Etruscans.
Right, there's there's tons of minor towns all over the place. I'm not, like Fidene, this town that they keep fighting over, I think it initially was somehow a colony of V. So there's all sorts of towns all throughout here, but yeah, it's 12 big towns that come together. Any other questions? All right, so let's jump into our story. So our next king is going to be Tarquinius Priscus. Now, he's going to be the 5th king of Rome, and he's going to be our first Etruscan king. He is the son of a wealthy Greek. So there was a Greek who was a great merchant. He ended up settling in Tarquinius or something like that, some Etruscan city that has a name that's very close to Tarquin. I can't remember the exact name of it. But he ends up settling in an Etruscan city and having a family there. He's a very successful merchant. And through some accident, his one son, who we're now going to refer to as Tarquinius Priscus, or I'm just going to refer to him as Tarquin from here on out. His son Tarquin, through chance, ends up with all of his wealth. And so his son Tarquin is growing up a very wealthy man, son of a very wealthy Greek immigrant to the Etruscans. Now, the Etruscans, in determining who can rule in their cities, they very much determine who can rule by bloodline. If you're not of the right bloodline, there is no chance of you rising up the political ranks in any Etruscan cities. So he's an ambitious man. He's married to Tarquinius, who is a girl of Etruscan nobility. And she says, I don't want to marry into a family that has lower standing than the family I'm leaving. So she's marrying him. He's a son of an immigrant, so there's no chance of him rising up the political ladder in the city that they're in, the Etruscan city that they're in. And so they decide that what they're going to do is they're going to move to Rome, because Rome has already gained this reputation for being a meritocracy. The greatest man can kind of rise to the top. Look at who's already been the kings of Rome. You had Romulus initially. They fought a war with the Sabines, and afterwards they took the Sabine king and made him a co-king with Romulus. Like, their enemy was a king the next day. And then they took Numa, who wasn't even from Rome. He just had such a great reputation. And then Ancus Marcius was the grandson of Numa. And so Tullus Hostilius and Romulus are like the only ones who are actually pure Latin blood that were ruling in Rome. So Rome's got this reputation. They're very ambitious people, married together, a noble girl and a very rich guy. And so they decide they're going to go to Rome and try and seek out power there. So the ambitious couple, they move to Rome. There's a story that on the way to Rome, as he was riding in his chariot, he had a hat on, and an eagle came, took his hat, flew around him a few times, and replaced the hat on his head. Now, something to know for Roman culture at the time, the Etruscans are known for being the ones who are like your great augurs, your great soothsayers, your people who are good at reading the omens, reading the signs are Etruscans. They have a special insight to these things. And so, Tarquinius, who is this Etruscan girl, the wife of Tarquin, she tells him that this is a sign that he's meant to eventually lead Rome or whatever. Something to that effect. Anyways, so they make it to Rome, and they set up shop there in Rome. Now, Tarquin, he instantly puts his wealth to work for him. He starts funding public projects. He's portrayed as a very charismatic guy. He's very polite to everyone. He makes a big splash, so to speak. And it's not long before he catches the eye of the king at the time. The king at the time is still Ancus Marcius when he moves to Rome. So the previous king is still the king when he moves to Rome. He's not the king yet. And Ancus Marcius ends up befriending him because of all the good that he's doing for Rome. And they're so close that Ancus Marcius not only uses him as an advisor, he actually makes him guardian to his sons. So now Tarquin is the guardian of the previous king's sons, of Ancus Marcius' sons, as well as a good advisor to the man. Okay, so now Ancus, he eventually dies. He died of natural causes. When he dies, the first thing that Tarquin does is he sends Ancus Marcius' two sons out on a long hunting trip. Get them out of the city. So the sons are sent away on some hunting trip, and while they're sent away on the hunting trip, Tarquin approaches the Senate, and he pushes the Senate to elect him to be the next king of Rome. Now this is the first time that we know of that someone actually solicited the Senate for the position. So he gave some speech about, you should make me your next king, and here's why. And he goes through his spiel about all the good he's done for the city, about how they shouldn't feel embarrassed about selecting a foreigner to rule in their city, because look at their past. This is nothing unusual. So he gives whatever argument that he gives that they should ultimately elect him to be the king. And it ends up happening, and they decide to select him to be the king, and he becomes the next king of Rome. Once the Senate selects him, the people instantly go along with it because he has a great reputation amongst people. He has been very generous with his wealth. And so he kind of buys his position as the Roman king through what he does for the work, or what he does for the city with his public works. And so now he's the first king that we have that is not of a Latin or Sabine origin. He's of an Etruscan origin. One of the first things he does is he appoints 100 new senators to the Senate, making our total now 300 senators.
Oh, we were at 300.
No, we were at 200. We were at 100 with Romulus, 200 when the...
Sabines?
Not the Sabines, when Alba Longa was Ryan, or was it the Sabines? Did we double with Alba Longa?
No, we got 100 with Sabines, and then
And then there was another.
yeah.
Now you're making me wonder.
Yeah, we should be at
It's
400.
300 senators. That means I messed up adding 100 at a time. I don't think senators were added with Alba Longa. Were they? Sugar.
Pretty sure it is.
All right. I'm fairly confident that we're at 300 senators now.
Is there any?
So I lied somewhere in the past.
No.
Maybe after Romulus combined with the Sabines, there was 100 senators. And I got the order wrong there. And then Alba Longa brought up to 200, and then now we're at 300. Or maybe some senators just died off and weren't being replaced. And maybe the numbers dwindled down.
I thought the problem they had with like Numa is that they were so divided with 100 on
You're
100.
right. Yep, so 200 with Romulus. So that means that Hostilius would not have increased the Senate when he conquered Alba Longa.
Mhm.
So he brought the population, he did not expand the Senate. Or if he did, the senators died. Or I'm off on 300, but I don't think I am, because 300 is a number through the majority of the Republic. All right,
At 5, let's see.
this would,
Okay, all the way up from
You can just kind of
509 BC to
search.
300 BC was 300 senators.
right, so it's going to be 300 for a long time. So I think it was 300. So I'm off on the appointments. I think it must be Alba Longa that I'm off on. Okay, anyways, so he appointed 100 new senators, and he appoints them from some of the younger families. So what he does, essentially, in appointing these 100 senators, is he pretty much got 100 senators who are going to be completely loyal to him because he's the one who appointed them and gave them their position. And furthermore, he's picking them to be these younger guys. He's picking them from younger families, younger guys, so that they're going to last a bit longer. And then the next thing he does is, he's famous for, is increasing the cavalry to 1,800 or 1,200. Not sure. One of the two numbers. But prior to this, it should have been at 600.
I remember that.
So, massive increase in the cavalry. And we'll see when that happens. Famous works get started under him. 3 massive works get started under him. The Cloaca Maxima, not sure how exactly you say that, but this was basically their sewer system. So looking at Rome at the time, here's roughly what it would have looked like water-wise. Forget these walls here, Rome's expanded more. I just want you to focus on the water. The problem that Rome has is there's a bunch of water between all these hills. So one of the things he initiates is starting this massive sewer system to start draining the water in between the hills and get it out of where the city is ultimately expanding to. So that's one of his major works. His second major work that he starts is what is called the Circus Maximus. And you've probably heard about the Circus Maximus before. And when he starts to work on the Circus Maximus, he hosts some chariot races, some boxing, and that becomes an annual thing that Rome starts doing every year from there on out. And it's referred to there as the Roman Games. Most famous amongst it being the chariot races, which were a big deal for the Etruscans. So there's them adopting some of that culture.
So this wasn't gladiator time? Or?
No, this isn't gladiator time, and the Circus Maximus is not the Colosseum. Let's jump ahead for a second. Here's what the Circus Maximus looks like when it's fast forward to the middle of the Roman Republic, fast forwarding a few hundred years. This is not what he built. This thing at its maximum could support up to 300,000 people. What he built was laying it out, and they started building bleachers, wooden bleachers to support people to see the games. So here's how big it would have been, but this would not be this nice developed architecture. It would be, go take those bleachers at your basketball game, make them out of wood, and start building them up around type thing.
What's those lines going up or through it?
I don't know what those are supposed to be. Maybe some rope that they're pulling for like a cover. I don't know. But largely you can see it was built for chariot races. Okay, so that's the Circus Maximus. That's what he started. He doesn't complete any of these works, he starts them. And then the other work he starts is the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. Very important temple there in Rome. And then finally, he also he's extended the city walls and started doing more to enclose the growing city in new city walls. So those are the major works that he does, that he starts throughout his life.
Did they have gladiator games throughout history, the early history, or is that something?
I don't know when gladiator games were introduced. I would bet that gladiator games were a thing amongst the Etruscans and were adopted that way. That would be my bet, but I'm not positive. But Levy specifically mentions chariot races at this time and boxing at this time.
Boxing, like how we know it, or
Probably what we would call bare knuckle boxing. But no idea. Okay, so there's his major works. Now let's focus on the major conflict that consumes him. So once again, there he is, king. He gets appointed as king. What happens? The Latins, claiming that previous treaties had expired, decide once again that this is a good time to revolt against Rome, and they launch some attacks against Rome. Now, without Tarquin knowing it, they sent messages up to the Sabines over here and up to the Etruscans up here, asking them for support in their rebellion against Rome. Remember, Etruscans don't like Rome, big enemies. Etruscans are very happy to help Latin tribes rebel against Rome.
Even though their king is Etruscan?
Even though their king is of Etruscan descent. Still enemies with Rome. So, and I don't know, to their mind they might even say, no, he's of Greek descent. I don't know. They're a lot more bloodliness, whatever you would say.
That's right. He
than
power.
other cultures are going to be. Okay, so the Latins petition the Sabines and the Etruscans for help in their conflict against Rome. And then they start the fighting. The problem that they have is that Tarquin, the king of Rome, he's able to deal with the rebellions pretty quick before either the Sabines or the Etruscans could even mobilize to go help with the fighting. So he deals with the pesky revolts pretty quick, and he gets back to work on the public works that he's working on here. In particular, he gets back to work on extending the wall. Now, unknown to him, the Sabines were actually coming to help. And so the Sabines got an army that they're getting ready to come with, and the Etruscans, 5 cities from the Etruscans, I'm not sure which 5, they sent troops to the Sabines to join the Sabine army to help the Sabines go fight. And so the Sabine army, I'm not sure exactly where it comes from, but it said that they were able to cross the Anioi, this river, the Anio, I'm not sure, Anio, they were able to cross the river before Tarquin was even aware that they were coming. And they were already within miles of Rome. This creates huge panic in Rome. They're able to launch an attack on Rome. Remember that the walls aren't completely done yet, so some of this fighting actually happens inside, like next to people's houses type fighting. Urban type fighting. Now the Romans are ultimately able to repel them, and what these guys end up doing is making base up by the river. And so you got the river. They built a bridge across the river so that they could quickly cross it. And the Sabines, they built their camp right next to the bridge, next to the river up here. They're staying close to the river because then they can quickly transport things where they need to transport things. Your rivers are your highways. So what Tarquin ends up doing to deal with this new threat, so they would have been camped somewhere up here, what he does to deal with this threat and try and get rid of them is, first thing he does is before going out, he decides to double his cavalry, is the way it's phrased. Now, I don't know if that means that he had 1,200 cavalry or 1,800 cavalry, but Rome now has much more cavalry than they used to have. Here's when he actually does a doubling to help deal with the threat. And with that, what he does is he sends a group of men upriver, and what they do is they throw a bunch of debris in the river, and they build a bunch of little rafts and put debris on it, and they start fires on it. And so that debris floats down the river. And it floats down the river and gets stuck on these guys' bridge, and it starts burning the bridge. At the same time, he lines up his army. So you got his army here, and now the Sabine army comes out of their camp, and you got the Sabine army here, and they're fighting each other. And the Sabines are largely winning the fighting, while their bridge is being burned that they don't really realize what's going on. When they see the smoke coming up from the bridge as being burned, they get a little bit worried that someone's behind them. And what he does with his cavalry is he splits them into 2 units on either side, and he flanks the army on both sides. When they're getting flanked on both sides, with the fact that they see the smoke behind them, they panic, and they decide it's time to book it past their camp and cross the river, get out of here. When they run back to the bridge is practically destroyed. They can't cross the bridge by walking across it. And while they're booking it, they have now doubled cavalry kind of mowing them down the entire time. Remember, in these ancient battles, the majority of the deaths do not happen during the fighting. They happen when one army tries fleeing the battlefield. And these guys are now especially in trouble because Rome has a lot of cavalry to chase them down. And so as they're trying to run back across the river, the bridge isn't there, so now they have to cross the river just trying to cross it how they can, while men on cavalry are killing them the entire way. The Sabines take massive losses here. When they get back across the river, with whatever men they have left, probably would have lost anywhere between like half of their, probably close to like half their army, I don't know, making up numbers. They would have lost a huge portion of their army. Tarquin realizes this is his chance to get a nice, decisive victory over the Sabines and make sure they're not going to be an issue for a while going forward. And so he decides to pursue them even past the river. So as those guys retreat, they regroup. The Sabines have no choice but to hurry up and get as many raw recruits as they can together in an army to deal with the Romans now coming after them. And so they throw together a makeshift army. They fight a battle with Rome. Rome wins that battle decisively. The Sabines, they are destroyed. They're defeated. There's nothing that they're going to be able to do against Rome for a while, and they know it. They've lost a huge portion of their male fighting population. And so, as part of the peace treaty that they negotiate with Rome, Rome gets this city right here, Caladia. Now, this map, here's Rome, here's the top of the Anio River. And so this city on this map will be somewhere like over here. So that was a Sabine city, a city that the Sabines had control over. They lost that city now to the Romans, and so now the Romans have control over that city. And you see now Rome is extending its control not only over this river, but over this river. Any questions so far?
Are the keys in the car right
They're in my backpack. Any other questions?
there? Wait, what is it?
If the Sabines are basically destroyed, why can't Rome just basically sack the cities, take all their people, kind of like the old traditional way of community
It would probably be a lot of, they still have their walled cities. We don't have time to do sieges with them, so we can't just go and take their cities piece by piece, because a few men can hold off a city against a lot. So, but they're probably enough there that they can wreak havoc in like their surrounding towns or crops, whatever. And so, better to just give them cities for free and just let them have it, than force them to siege more. So, and I'm not sure if other towns were somehow part of that negotiation, but this is the most famous one that was for sure handed over. Any other questions? Were you saying? Okay. And then so, with that, dealt with the Sabines. The Etruscans kind of got beat, kind of in a way, by extension, because they contributed troops to that battle. What Tarquin does with the Etruscan troops that were sent to the Sabines is he integrates them with Rome. So there they were, the Etruscans sent them specifically to fight against the Romans, and now he just supplemented his army with these Etruscan troops. There were still some Latin towns after the fact that were still kind of rebelling, so once he deals with the Sabines, goes, puts down the rebellions really quick, and now in a pretty good position. This was an extremely fruitful war in terms of gathering plunder, gathering loot, and so he has what is referred to as a triumph. So Tarquin celebrates a triumph, and the date he celebrates it is September 13th, 585 BC. Now triumphs are a big deal in Rome. Any Roman can tell you when the triumphs occurred throughout the past.
This is like the parades or not?
Yes, this is just like the parades. So what exactly is a triumph? Let's jump into a little bit of the details of a Roman triumph. So a Roman triumph, first off, it's an entire day celebrating a particular great victory or series of victories. So if we were going to have a triumph, we would know that this is an entire day of celebrating. That's what it's going to be.
4th of July.
Yeah, big celebration. I think on average, a triumph came about once every 4 years for throughout Rome's history, up until the empire. Then they die off. So they're celebrated about once every 4 years, and so someone having a triumph, they're very well known if a political figure has a triumph. You would definitely know who that political figure was, kind of like for us knowing who the President of the United States was. So it's a big deal winning a triumph. It's the biggest. Once we get to the Roman Republic, it's the biggest honor you can achieve as a citizen, is a Roman triumph. Can't beat it. But he has a first triumph. I'm going to walk you through what a Roman triumph was. I don't know how much of this was established in his day, but since it's how all triumphs kind of are going forward, this might not be how they actually are until we fast forward 100 years or 200 years, I'm not sure. But triumphs are such a thing for so much time in Rome, I'm just going to tell you how they were. So maybe his wasn't this way, but this is how triumphs in general were. Okay, so going over a triumph, it's an entire day celebrating a particular victory, always related to a general achieving great victories. That's what they're celebrating. And it would be a massive parade of armed soldiers inside the Pomerium. Now this is huge, because it's a death penalty offense for you to come into the Pomerium armed. Remember, the Pomerium is the boundary around the city. This is the one exception to that, when a general and his soldiers were allowed to enter Rome under triumph. And for one day, they were allowed to actually be military units inside of the city. Outside of that, wasn't allowed. So here's one exception. And essentially, the biggest part of this triumph is a big old parade that goes through the city. What shows up in that parade? So first you would see a bunch of displays and artwork of the conflict that the general just won. So a bunch of propaganda showing how great this general was in the battles that just happened, telling you the story of the wars. Next, you would see all the seized wealth. So then you would see all the gold, all the silver, everything that they conquered from those cities are actually bringing into Rome now. Rome is becoming wealthier. You're watching it happen before your very eyes. Next, they would bring in captured enemies. They would usually try to get like the head generals or head kings of the people that they had just conquered. Typically, once you win the battle, you'd kill the king. If they could, they would try to keep them alive for the Roman triumph as a second humiliation. Now, this was to humiliate their enemies even further. Force them to participate in this parade celebrating their defeat. Next, you would see the triumphator, the person that the triumph is celebrating. In this case, it would be Tarquin, our king, who just won these battles. Going forward, this is going to be just generals winning great wars. And how is our triumphator going through this parade? First off, he's going to be dressed completely in purple, with his face painted red. Purple somehow being the color of the gods, and the red paint on the face somehow representing Jupiter. It's almost like they're dressing up as Jupiter, the king of the gods. So that's how he would dress, and he'd be pulled by a chariot that has 4 horses. So it'd be a very impressive spectacle. And after that, he'd be followed by his friends, close family, whatever. And then immediately after that would be the actual army that won the victory following behind. And they had a bunch of fun, these guys. It was kind of expected that they would kind of sing crude and rude songs, particularly about their leading captain. So it was all done in good humor, meant to be funny, meant to bring comedy to the whole thing. And the soldiers drunk, having a good time. The path that they would actually take, so they would start by entering the Pomerium through the triumphal gate, some special gate that they had where it starts. They would then go through the Circus Maximus, which we just showed you, do a couple laps in there. That's where the majority of the public would go to watch the parade. And then they would go to the richer part of town, where the temple of Jupiter Optimus was located, and that's where it would end. So the parade would end there. Then they would kill any of the people that were forced to participate, any of their captured enemies that were forced to participate. Now they get to die, now that they've been humiliated again. And then sacrifice 2 cows to Jupiter, and then everyone goes home to their respective feasts and spend a whole day celebrating. Now, the morning of the next day, all the soldiers instantly lose any right they have to have arms in the city. Anyone who's in the city, they instantly lose their military power inside the city the next day. This was a one-day exception, and now that power is gone. Good?
How do you lose? Like, they just.
You're no longer authorized to do it.
But you still have your swords and army. Do they just have to leave?
I'm not sure the logistics of how they would deal with that type of stuff.
Seems like a big problem.
It could be a big problem. And I'm not sure how armed they were. They may have just wore their military attire without the actual sword. But outside this, an army entering Rome, that's a big no-no. Not allowed to do it.
Yeah.
So this was the only exception. Okay, so that is the big triumph, and Tarquin is largely credited with celebrating the first triumph. And anytime we talk about he had a triumph, it's going to be pretty much this style. Any questions about the triumph? All right, so he won his battle against the Sabines. He dealt with a bunch of the local tribes. And now what happens? Well, remember those 5 Etruscan towns that gave troops to the Sabines? And when Rome beat the Sabines, they took those Etruscan troops and integrated them into their army. Those 5 Etruscan cities are now talking to Rome, and they're saying, hey, we want our troops back. Tarquin's reply, sucks to suck. You're not getting them back. Thanks for the troops. So the 5 Etruscan cities, they're very furious about this. And so they reach out to some other Etruscan cities looking for support to start a new war against Rome. And they're able to get 7 other Etruscan cities to participate in this. So it's a total of 12 Etruscan cities. Not the 12 Etruscan cities, just 12 Etruscan cities. That are going to be putting their resources together to try and take on Rome.
How on earth did he convert Etruscan prisoners of war into his army? Considering they probably had a lot of attachment and family in the other cities, like were they being forced into being soldiers, or were they like?
We don't know that much details on it. The sense I got is that they were largely just kind of mercenaries that had already been paid for.
Oh, mercenaries. That makes
But
sense.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
But whatever it was, Tarquin likes them enough that he's keeping them. Maybe he's keeping them purely out of spite and they're locked up in a cell somewhere.
Oh.
Maybe they were actually helping. The way it's portrayed is he was now using their own troops against them. Anyways, So 5 Etruscan cities, along with 7 others, they decide that they're going to declare war against Rome. First thing they do, anytime the Etruscans are going to Rome, is they go back and try to get that town of Fidenae. Because remember, that was originally an Etruscan town. That population still largely speaks the Etruscan language, not the Latin language. And so they go to Fidenae, they incite a revolt, they bring their armies, help them with the revolt, and they take the town back from Rome. And then there's some back and forth. Nothing special really happens in the battle. It's pretty much just by brute force that Tarquin was able to take the town back from the Etruscans. So Fidenae is now back in Roman control. And he loots some of the smaller towns that participated in this, once again bringing that wealth back to Rome. And you notice that Tarquin started a lot of big public works. A lot of money is coming into the city to help fund these works. The sewer system that he's building, this big stadium that he's building, and the temple to Jupiter that he's building. So those are all in progress under his reign. Any other questions about that?
So they were actually able to take Fidenae.
They took it for a little bit and then lost it again. Alright, so continuing now with the story. Ocrisia, not sure how to say her name. Ocrisia is a Latin princess who was in one of these towns that revolted against Rome, going back to before we fought the Sabines. So she was a princess in one of these Latin towns that rebelled against Rome. Rome came, conquered the town, and integrated the population with Rome. A bunch of them sent back as slaves. So here's a princess. She is brought back to Rome, and she's brought back as a slave. Because she's of noble blood, she's kind of just put to work in the palace where the king lives. Kind of respecting the fact that she's a Latin princess. Now, she was either pregnant at the time or already had a son when she went. But in either case, she has a son, Servius Tullius. And he grows up in the palace right there with all the king's sons. Now, story goes that when he was a baby, when Servius Tullius was a baby, there was a fire in the palace that he miraculously survived the fire. That's one version of the story. Now I'm going to tell you the more fun version of the story. The more fun version of the story is that when he was a baby sleeping, that fire appeared kind of like a ring of fire around his head. And so the people working in the palace, the help in the palace, they went to hurry up and try and put out the fire. And that the queen, what's her name? I've got to have it up here somewhere.
It was on the previous slide.
Ocrisia?
No.
It was like Tarkin, but with A's.
Tanaquil or something like that. Tanaquil, there it is. Okay, the queen, Tanaquil, remember that she's an Etruscan. And these guys are famous for being able to read signs and interpret strange events. So she sees this fire around the king's head. She tells the help, don't touch. We're not putting the fire out. Let's see what happens. And so the fire is going around his head, and when the baby wakes up, the fire miraculously disappears. And so she says that this is a sign that he is meant to be essentially the next king of Rome. So she tells her husband Tarquin about this event and tells her that, and basically convinces him that they should raise Servius Tullius as a son. Which Tarquin agrees to because his wife knows how to read these things. She knows what she's talking about. So he's meant to be the next king. So Tarquin basically adopts Servius Tullius as a son. And he goes so far as to engage his daughter to him, thank you. So Tarquin engages his own daughter to Servius Tullius. And so what this looks like to everyone outside of it is exactly what it is. It looks like that he's setting up Servius Tullius to be his heir. So this is seen as Tarquin setting up his own heir, selecting his own heir, the person that's going to be the king after him. Which is a big no-no. You don't get to choose who the king is. The Senate gets to choose who the king is. And there's still another problem. The previous king, Ancus Marcius, remember, he had 2 sons. And that his 2 sons were sent away on a hunting trip by Tarquin, as Tarquin talks the Senate into making him the king. So now the sons of Incus, the previous king, are looking at this and they're saying, not only did you send us away and talk them into giving you the throne, you are now choosing who you think your next heir is going to be, rather than it even being considered to be one of us. On top of that, even more disgraceful, you're choosing the son of a slave to replace us. Here we are, the sons of actual kings, and you're choosing as your heir the son of a slave. That's not going to fly. So, the sons of Incus Marcius, the ones that got sent away on a hunting trip, now that we're all matured and grown up, they decide that they're going to assassinate Tarquin. Get the revenge that way. And the way that they set up this assassination is they get two farmers together, and they talk those farmers into basically fighting, pretending to have a big argument. So they pay off these two farmers. What do these two farmers do? These two farmers go outside the palace, and they basically start yelling at each other and making a lot of fuss, pretending that there's some big conflict between the two farmers. Now the king, he's the head judge. They make so much fuss and so much ruckus that they end up getting brought before the king, so that the king can hear what the fuss is all about. And while one of the farmers is explaining his position, the other farmer gives him an axe to the head.
To the other farmer?
No, the two farmers were pretending to fight.
They were assassins.
They were assassins.
Gotcha.
So the two farmers, they're standing there screaming at each other, with the king standing in between them, looking over at that one, and this guy gives him an axe to the head.
Subtle.
Yeah, very subtle. They try escaping after the fact. The farmers, they run out after the axe gets put in the king's head. They don't make it that far. I think they end up getting killed in the process.
Makes sense.
And it starts spreading very quickly that the king's been killed. The king's been killed. And so it starts kind of a mob rising going on. A lot of chaos. The queen, Tanaquil, she acts very quickly. First thing she does is hurries up and gets everyone out of the room as fast as she can. And then she sends for the healers, pretending that he's still alive. And she gets to work pretending that she's nursing his wound. He's dead. King died. She's pretending that he's not dead and that he survived this attack. And so she makes a big show about how he is actually alive. Don't worry, the wound, it wasn't that bad. We got it all covered. Yes, he's hurt, but he'll be good as new. Give him a month or two to recover and we'll be fine. That's how she's kind of portraying it. She says, in the meantime, she tells her son, Servius, she says that the king has appointed Servius to act basically as his regent in the meantime. So he's going to take on all the roles of the king, but Tarquin is still the real king, and there he is sick in bed. Don't worry about it. Trust me. And so Servius, he takes to this new role. He starts acting as a king. One of his major jobs is, judging over cases. If it ever seems like the senators are not really comfortable with him dealing with it, then he says, okay, I'll take this one back to my stepfather, whatever. I'll take this one back to the king, and I'll have him make judgment over this case. So he's pretending that he's still answering to the king while fulfilling all the roles of the king. Well, this can only go on for so long. And eventually, it gets out that actually the king is dead. And they discover that Servius has kind of just been acting in the role. And with the help of basically a bodyguard with him and the support of the Senate, he is quickly recognized as the next king. Now, he was never elected. So the people never approved of him, the people never selected him, and he didn't even go through the Senate selection process. He just got the Senate to really quick sign off with it, with the help of a strong guard.
And they threatened him?
And the terminology is, with the help of a strong guard, the Senate recognized his kingship. So he is now recognized as the next king without going through this voting process. Tarquin ruled for a total of 38 years before he got the axe to the head. And that's the end of his reign.
Was he loved by the people?
Tarquin? I'm not sure how much the people loved him or not. They definitely loved him early on. I'm not sure if anything in his rule would change that. Because he just brought a bunch, I can't imagine why they wouldn't have. They for sure did early on. Because he was just so generous with his wealth. And later on, he won a bunch of great victories. A bunch of public works were built using that funding under his reign. So I would guess the people loved him. Seems like a very loved king. Okay. Any other questions before we switch to our next king?